Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Ryan Heckman, the CEO of Rally Day Partners, and this is the Founder's Journey podcast. We'll explore the heart and soul of great founders and their journey to build the company of their dreams. You will learn about new industries and business models while discovering how to apply the founder's mindset to your everyday work and life. Welcome to another episode of Rally Day Partners Founder's Journey podcast. I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Kip Tindell to our podcast today. Kip is the founder of the Container Store. Perhaps some of you have heard of the Container Store. Kip wrote an incredible book called Uncontained, which is, in my mind, only maybe the second best title I've heard, maybe next to John Mackey's book, The Whole Story, and his life at Whole Foods. And I know you two have a great and rich, long history together, so we'll get into that a bit. What I would say about Kip is we met over a dinner at a Conscious Capitalism event. My wife, Nadia, and I had dinner with Kip and his wife, Sharon. And what I noticed immediately was the way he treated everybody, including the wait staff. There was a certain look that he gave everyone in the eye that said they were important. And as a result, we had an incredibly fun and high quality dinner together. And I only bring that up because I noticed with a lot of people of Kip's stature that, as you get, I guess, more famous, more wealthy, more distinguished, that sometimes you expect the wait staff at a dinner to approach you in a certain way. And then sometimes we complain about the service. And it was very obvious to me that Kip was taking responsibility for the wait staff's experience because it was a genuine part of his character. And I noticed that about the kind of people that we like to partner with. Nadia and I were speaking about Kip and Sharon on our drive home, and we're just sort of, I guess, in awe. We were starstruck by the headline, but I guess impressed by the quality of the substance and the storytelling that Kip and Sharon shared with us about their journey of building the Container Store into its prominence today. So I grabbed Kip after the dinner and I said, "Hey, would you mind being on our podcast?" And I think in a moment of weakness, he said yes. And here we are 3 months later. And I am just super grateful, Kip, for you sharing your valuable time with me and our listeners. It's a great honor.
Thank you, Ryan. Gosh, you're so incredibly kind. And what a dinner that was. I really would like to recreate that. Sharon and I are big foodies. We believe a pretty good hobbies to eat some of the world's best food and drink some of the world's best wine. And since we've retired from the Container Store, we've been doing quite a lot of that. But the most important thing about food and dinners is who you're eating with. You should decide who you're going to eat with first and where you're going to eat and what you're going to eat second and third. And that was a wonderful time and a wonderful evening. And I think that the whole stakeholder capitalism, conscious capitalism thing is a great way to, bond people together. So thanks for having me. And I can't wait to talk to you about your experience with private equity and your devotion and love to conscious capitalism and how those two things go together, because I think they can go together. I think that we've made some progress in trying to get that type of thing to work, because entrepreneurs that are devoted to conscious capitalism, either their dad has to leave them $3 billion, which mine did not, or they have to go public, or they have to have private equity, or all the alternatives are not completely ideal. And when Jim Sinegal, who's the co-founder of Costco, once told me that every great business, every great company has its stock fallen by half, its stock fall by 50% 3 times a decade. I thought he was wrong. I researched it, and it's true. I mean, Amazon's had it happen like 7 times. And, at that point in time, sticking to your conscious capitalism ideals while the market is going crazy because your stock price is down and the activist investors are invading your office, that's some of the most important points, too, to talk about how entrepreneurs can withstand those periodic assaults when things aren't going as well stock price-wise as they have in the past. So it's all fun, and I've formulated a lot of opinions on it, like you have, and can't wait to talk further about it.
Perfect. Well, I think if it's okay with you, we'll spend about half the time talking about your personal journey, which I got to learn a little bit about over our dinner. And what little I heard was just amazing. So I think people will really enjoy that. And you tell the story with a little bit of an aw shucks attitude, but I think everybody knows who will be listening the humility through which you see your journey. But I'd like to talk through that for maybe 30 minutes. And then I would like to double click on your opinions and experiences and philosophies around what is now being called conscious capitalism, which you and the founder of Whole Foods, John Mackey, have been evangelists out there in the market supporting. I think our listeners will be interested to hear how maybe they can use their businesses or even their careers for goodness. And I think the conscious capitalism movement provides a nice blueprint for that, both at the organizational level and the personal level. So that'll be a very fun way for us to conclude this conversation. But let's start, if you don't mind, where were you raised? What were some of your influences? And how did you, I guess, get into the retail business in the first place, either as an employee or ultimately as an entrepreneur?
Well, I was raised in a barn. No. I've been in Dallas since the fifth grade. My dad worked for Halliburton, which nobody had heard of in those days, oil well service company, and he, in Lake Charles, Louisiana, went to LSU, Louisiana State University. I loved Louisiana. It was kind of an idyllic Leave It to Beaver childhood, great parents, great brother, a great community. Then he got promoted and we moved to Dallas, and I loved Dallas, went through public schools, but I decided I wanted to go to Jesuit high school, Jesuit college prep, as it's now known, in the ninth grade, which was weird because I was dating the cheerleader and the best baseball player in the school and all that. And I left the ninth grade, which is the seventh, eighth, ninth was junior high, to go be a freshman wearing a beanie and getting beaten up at Jesuit because that's ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. And it was crazy, but I think it helped me a lot because I just thought the education would be better there. And in the eighth grade, I don't know how I knew or cared about that, but it was. The Jesuits in those days, the Jesuit priests, and we were mostly taught by Jesuit priests, they were so liberal. Most of them were agnostic, but they did believe in knowledge and education. And so it was just, and they weren't that much older than us. They were like 25 or 26. And so I became very interested in philosophy. And, you get to be a kind of a obnoxious 17, 18-year-old talking about Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. And I wound up majoring in English at the University of Texas. And I wanted to major in philosophy, but my dad, the oil background, he wouldn't let me. He said, if you major in philosophy, you got to pay your own way through college. And so I majored in English, which is the same thing, of course, and read everything. And I used the sort of life philosophies that I learned through all of that to formulate these 7 foundation principles that we founded the company on. And that was under the thought that people talk a lot about empowering their employees, but how do you really empower your employees? Okay, let's come up with a few foundation principles and get everybody to agree to those. And then let's unshackle the employees. Let's liberate them to be able to interpret those any way they want. And by doing that, you get people to feel unbridled, to use their intuition. And that's really the only way to capture their creative genius. And people loved it. I mean, we had single-digit employee turnover in an industry that infamously has triple-digit, turnover. People would join the Container Store and they would never leave, So the person waiting on you in the store has probably been there 11 years or something like that. It actually knows something about solving your toy storage problem. So I don't know. You mentioned John Mackey. John Mackey and I were roommates at the University of Texas, which is really weird. We were roommates, and then we got out of school. Neither one of us graduated. We were kind of proud of that. We both have too many hours. You only needed 120 hours. We have more than that, but I'm lacking 6 hours in math science. I mean, and he decided that he was only going to read what he wanted to read and take what courses he wanted to take. And so philosophy was very important to him, very important to me. I thought he was the most interesting kid in Austin. He probably still is, And we kind of imposed our philosophy about life that evolved into a philosophy about business. And I mean, it's really for many years, now there's more, but for many years, there were the only two truly ethically based companies. I mean, we were trying to make money. We both like to make money. We are capitalists. But, there are a lot of ethics involved, a lot of philosophies involved. We took being employee first very, very seriously. If you're employee first, that means a lot of things, and we can talk a lot about that at length. But so I don't know, that interest in reading, that English major thing. I think everybody should get an English degree, and then they can go on and get an engineering or become a doctor or whatever. But you should be able to read and write. And so if people wanted to join our company and they didn't agree with these foundation principles, well, then we didn't want them, and didn't want to be a part of us. But it's pretty hard to disagree with them because they're all kind of like the golden rule. It's like, no, I don't really believe in that do unto others thing. I mean, who doesn't believe in that?
Well,
So,
you bring up the Jesuit education system. There's a really cool book that was recommended to me some months ago I think it was called Heroic Leadership. It was written by, of all people, a former investment banker named Chris Lowney, I want to say. But it talked about applying.
Ryan, we got to get you away from all these investment bankers, man.
No doubt. Well, that's why I'm talking to you. But he was a reformed investment banker in this case. Okay. And he was reflecting on his career and, his awakening of going back to the principles that he learned through the Jesuit education and the Jesuit education system's impact on the world and how you could apply that to your life's ambitions. It was actually a really good book. So I'm struck by your attending that high school, being a freshman twice in some ways, and that unlocking something inside of you that snowballed. Did you and John, as he built Whole Foods, did you all jab each other about who was making more progress with their respective businesses along the way? Or what was that like as you looked over the fence, so to speak, to see your old buddy building Whole Foods while you were doing something revolutionary in the storage and retail space?
We were so busy. I mean, I don't know, at that stage, you're working 14 or more hours a day, 6 or usually 7 days a week. I'm not bragging, but that's just what happens when you love what you're doing. You're building a business like that and it's going really, really well and you're growing very, very fast. And so there's not much time to hang out with old friends or anything, but we knew that we both felt this way about this is the way to build a business, In fact, you mentioned Uncontainable. Thank you for your kind words about the book, Uncontainable. The subtitle of that is How Passion, Commitment, and Conscious Capitalism Built a Business Where Everyone Thrives. Hell, we were English majors and history majors. We didn't know any better. Sharon's a landscape architect. We didn't know that you couldn't build a business where everybody thrives, and that's what we were trying to do. The whole stakeholder model of conscious capitalism, the employees thrive, the vendors thrive. You treat your vendors just like you do your employees, you get a lot farther with them. We would get better pricing from our vendors than Walmart. We didn't deserve better pricing, but they just liked us better, I mean, we had a better relationship with them, and we formed a win-win relationship with them. So let's build a business where everybody thrives. Whole Foods was doing the same thing, and it was a relief to know that somebody else believed that this was possible and that could work. And then Time Magazine came down and did an interview with us. The interview lasted like 8 hours, and it was in John's office, and we were just falling on the floor laughing. The writer was too, at how hysterical it was that we had these similar philosophies that we'd never talked about. It was like, two monkeys on two different islands. Oh, we spent a lot of time together when we were, in college. But I mean, and so that was very interesting too. And there were similarities. And since my wife was a chief merchant and probably the primary reason the Container Store was so successful, I had a lot of very strong beliefs about the vendor, the manufacturer stakeholder. And John thought that they were weak on that, so he wanted me to help them with that. And then I thought he was better at this. And so that was pretty cool stuff. And we're just kind of proud of each other. But basically, you don't have time for your grandmother or John Mackey or anybody else when you're building a business like that. So we didn't stay in contact as much as we would like to. And then now it's really fun to reflect back on that and help other people to try to build businesses like that. Thank goodness there's more and more and more of them.
And along that journey at the Container Store, it was founded, was it 1979, Kip? Is that roughly?
1978, we opened the first store in Dallas at Preston Forest, a little 1,600 square foot store. 1,600 square feet is not very big. $2 a square foot in rent, and this little forgotten shopping center that progress had kind of leaped over. And we spent 2 years without pay, developing the concept, developing the resources prior to that. So really 76, 77 particularly, without pay, which was tough. And then while we were walking to school barefoot in the snow, we paid each other $700 a month for a long time, then $1,000 a month. And, but God, it was just heaven. It was heaven for 42 years.
That's amazing run, 42 years. John talks a lot about how his second unit was the hardest one because he had to try to figure out how to take the, I guess, mystery and magic of unit one and create more process and systems around unit two. Did you have a similar, I guess, experience the first time you and Sharon decided to open your second? And what was that moment like?
Yeah, we spent a long time thinking that we should never have but one store. And we kept expanding the size of it. We were slowly taking over the whole shopping center. And our big dream was to be successful enough to take over the whole bowling alley across the street. We did that. I knew we could because Dallas was very Baptist in those days, and so there was no alcohol. So they couldn't even sell beer and wine in this bowling alley. I said, you can't keep that location without any revenue coming from that. And so we got the bowling alley, and then we were a big store. But then we opened Park City's Mockingbird and Central store number 2. And it was great. Everything that you said, everything that John was worried about, it was the same thing. Of course, it was the same people. It became more difficult as we began. Then we opened in Austin after several stores in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex because we felt comfortable with Austin because we'd gone to school there. And then it was really when we opened the Houston store at Post Oak and Westheimer, which is maybe the best commercial real estate corner in the Southwest. We did about 4 or 5 times the volume that we thought we were going to do. And it was just a nightmare. I mean, it was a beautiful nightmare. It actually wasn't beautiful. I mean, we were just hiring anybody that walked off the street. We were flying in things on Southwest Airlines. And that's when we really began to learn that we were going to have to translate our philosophies, our foundation principles, the things that we believe made us, and communicate those to all these hordes of new employees. Because it didn't feel like one of our stores. It felt like anything. It really was kind of horrifying us. And so, Starbucks has gone through that a few times in their history. A lot of companies have. A lot of founders have. You go, whoa, wait a minute! So much business, it's unbelievable. But it's like, oh, this is not right. And so then we learned to maintain growth at a level that we thought was sustainable culturally. And each store manager, if the new store managers weren't as good as the old store manager, then we need to slow our growth. And we found, and it sounds slow today, but we found 20% annual revenue growth was the right number. We were pretty close we were about 20% EBITDA too. So if you can have 20% EBITDA, 20% growth in those days, that was the most wildly successful retail chain in America. It really was. I mean, it was. Now with technology companies, 20% sounds slow, but 20% in a complicated specialty store chain is really fast. We could grow at 20%, and we did for many years. 15% later on, 20 back then, even more, of course, at first. But I was really happy with 2020, but we knew that we shouldn't grow faster than 20. And then years later, everybody wanted us to open in particularly Europe, in the Middle East, and particularly Japan. So we would fly over in the Concorde with Stanley Marcus and meet the owners of Harrods in London. And they said, "You're the greatest store in America. We want you to open right inside Harrods." And we had the whatever to say, "No, thank you. We're very honored. But I think if we do that, we'll lose what we have at home." And had we said yes to all that, we would have never been able to accomplish it. Because I think it can only grow so fast if it's that type of business. I don't know about a technology company. I don't know about NVIDIA, how fast they can grow, but we can only grow 20. And I think each business has to figure that out or you're going to lose it, So.
Funny enough, at Rally Day, we have this thing we call Rule of 40, which is that combination of 20% organic growth and 20% EBITDA margin
Yeah.
is aspirational for most of our companies, given that we don't do a lot of high tech and that kind of thing. So that sort of secret formula resonates for us, certainly. I am interested in your notion of capping your growth at the speed of culture. One of our aspirations is to help our founders make their cultures even better as they get bigger, which sounds maybe not all that aspirational, but as it turns out, size of the company typically erodes the culture, and that's what you were solving for. And we try to do that with a lot more work on the front end when we get involved on really getting crystal clear about the company's purpose. And our mutual friend, Haley Rushing, through Conscious Capitalism, has done that work across our portfolio over the years. And
Oh,
we interview employees and suppliers and kind of do a stakeholder scan to find out what that really provocative combination of what can we be really good at, what are we passionate about, and what does the world need us to do, that kind of Venn diagram. And then we go to our strategy that should serve that purpose. And then we spend probably maybe too much time figuring out how do we make sure that the culture is in service to the strategy and the purpose. And by that, we mean being very specific about the behaviors of all of us, from the bottom of the organization up through the executive team. What are those behaviors that are going to help us get better as we get bigger? And it's really hard to do, as you know. And interesting that you went a little bit almost a different direction and said, look, I know that if I grow too fast, I'm going to hurt our culture. And so we're going to put a governor on our growth to make sure that that never happens. I have not heard that from any founder that I have spoken to.
wow. Well, I think as you grow, you can make everything better culturally until you either wind up with some wrong leaders in place that you've hired mistakenly. They're not as culturally aligned as you and the original leadership, which is just a human resource mistake. I don't see that happen that often, but I've seen it happen before. And you always have a little bit of it. You always have one or two people that oh, I now realize that she's not right at all. But they have other strengths, right? But the real time that happens is when you let the wrong equity partners in, and every business in the world, you see that. And so I don't know, it's like, Ryan, you're still kind of a newlywed. You know how carefully, you select a life partner, and but that's obviously the way, you do that. I have a friend, Sonny Vanderbeck, that wrote a whole book on that. I mean, his Satori Capital, you probably know Sonny, big conscious capitalist, private equity guy, but there's nothing more important than that, and that's the quickest way to not have your culture grow with the business, because the wrong equity partners are over demanding of growth, which is just pretty much the story of Wall Street and capitalism and everything, but they don't have to be. And in fact, what results in the greatest profits and the greatest growth is to have all that in balance, to have that in harmony. Balance is the wrong word. Harmony is the better word. And it's kind of what stakeholder capitalism and conscious capitalism, are all about. And it's far better for the shareholder than it is for the shareholder to do it the other way. But not everybody, understands that. So you build a business where everybody thrives. If all you want to do is make more money more quickly, I would submit to you that this is the best way to do that. It's a superior form of capitalism for everybody. Sounds too good to be true, but it's absolutely a superior form of capitalism. And the best businesses I've ever known or seen generally, at least tilt in that direction, if not move in that direction very strongly. There are examples of great businesses, of course, that don't do that. And there's examples of companies that are very conscious capitalists, stakeholder capitalists, that do very poorly too. It's not 100%, but in general, it's a much better form of capitalism. You get much better profit and productivity, so to speak, out of your manufacturers and vendors. You get wildly better productivity out of your employees. We used to pay double the industry average but our sales per payroll dollar were at the top of the retail industry. So we paid twice as much as everybody. Jim Sinegal did the same thing at Costco. You had guys like Jim Sinegal out there, Herb Kelleher, the Southwest Airlines guy. They were pioneering this stuff long before I was a Jesuit. I mean, so they were around too. They were great mentors to me, particularly Herb Kelleher, and learned a lot from them. It's just getting entrepreneurs to believe that this stuff is really true. And I don't know why we've been messing around with stakeholder capitalism for 20 years, and we still haven't been able to definitively write a book and prove 2 + 2 is 4. Here's definitive proof that this works better than anybody else. And any other methodology. It does. It's clear to most people. But since there's always stakeholder capitalist, conscious capitalist businesses that fail, just like there are, the other type of businesses that fail, there's a segment of unfortunately, most of the world still doesn't quite believe it. So we're working on that. We're trying to reach, as you and I were talking beforehand, trying to bring together these great minds that are helping us move the world towards this form of capitalism, because it's not just happy and better, and the stakeholders aren't just thriving and doing better. It's a heck of a lot more profitable than any other methodology.
Well, why don't we go there powerfully? A lot of folks that are listening probably have not heard of conscious capitalism as an organization, or maybe even as a blueprint to building and running an organization. Why don't you do your best Raj imitation and teach us a little bit about what the core principles of conscious capitalism are, when conscious capitalism started as an organization, and what you guys are trying to do with it?
Well, there's basically conscious capitalism is in my opinion, is a subset of stakeholder capitalism. And stakeholder capitalism can best be described as where you find the harmony. Ed Freeman, who's kind of the rock star Darden ethics professor, is kind of credited with being the father of stakeholder capitalism. And he's a blues musician too. And he likes the word harmony, and so do I, because balance is troublesome. Harmony. So you harmonize the needs and wants and benefits of the employee and the vendor and the community, the environment, all of those things, and of course the shareholder. And that leads to the greatest benefit for all of them. And it's been proven over. There's countless cases. One of my favorite examples is Costco. They for many years paid almost double what Sam's Wholesale did, for the same job, for the same business. And maybe it was 80% more, but and they were, well, they were enjoying a lot more success than Sam's Wholesale was in those days. And, they're still, it's my favorite publicly traded stock to own as an investor. I really believe in Costco and did a great job of that. They help their manufacturers figure out ways to lower their cost. They don't just demand it and shrink the margin. They win, coach them, help them. Sinegal and I had an argument for 3 years about, we had 11,000 SKUs, stock keeping units, individual items. He said we should only have 1,500. And we talked about that for 3 years. Turns out he was right. But I was more into the beauty of selection. If I'm going to a cheese store, I want there to be 18 different varieties of Roquefort, And so he's like, that's bull. You don't want that here. So the average retailer would have 15 Advils, and Jim Sinegal just had one. And anyway, you can work with the Advil manufacturer to make that one that you have perfect in packaging and perfect in, and provide the lowest cost in the world at the appropriate margin for the retailer and the vendor. And that type of, working with the vendor is what interested me most in retail. We would become friends with these guys. We'd go on vacation with them. And then while we were in Italy, we would figure out how to make the world's best shoebox. We're on vacation. Are we friends? Or we blur the distinction between work and play, and you come up with products that don't exist anywhere else that make more money for you and more money for your vendor than anybody. That's not work. That's fun. That's cool stuff. And that's sort of the essence of conscious capitalism, stakeholder capitalism. I also like to think a lot about the Jimmy Stewart character, George Bailey, and It's a Wonderful Life. George Bailey, Bailey Savings and Loan. He was human, and he went through a depression, and he had to have the guardian angel keep him from. Or I guess he did jump off the bridge, and somehow the guardian angel saved him. But the whole movie is about showing how his sacrifice to the community, to his employees. Everybody's seen the movie. In the end, It's a Wonderful Life. He was the richest man in town, the most popular man in town. Even the savings and loan regulators were supporting him in the end. And he was the most successful guy around. And I like to think that after the movie ended, he also had the financial and economic benefit of all that. If the whole town supports you like that, I don't see how you could. Why would anybody else use any other savings and loan in that town? And forgive me for going on, but the other thing about George Bailey is that he understood the power of his wake, W-A-K-E, like a boat's wake. And that's one of my favorite thoughts, is the best people and the best leaders understand the power of their wake. The worst leaders and the worst people don't understand the power of their wake. They just go through causing all kinds of mayhem and disaster and really aren't even that aware of it. But the people that understand their wake can really make a difference and really provide great leadership and really change people's lives and really help make the world a better place. So there's something about George Bailey and the wake and that type of approach to the relationship with employees and vendors in the community. God, we built a 1 million square foot distribution center, and everybody in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex wanted to have us in their community. And the town of Coppell decided that because the way we treat our employees, they were big on family values, and so they practically gave us. They made it impossible for us not to locate there. And then we had the firemen and the policemen eating at our Gumby Cafe. Gumby was the flexible cartoon character, was our unofficial mascot, because flexibility is the key to life, certainly the key to retail. And the police were there, the firemen were there, and we tried to get people to eat healthy, and we subsidized the lunches. So we're subsidizing the lunches for the firemen and the policemen too, but that's okay. And that's an interesting thing. I'm interested in food, as I mentioned, and so you have a young warehouse worker, this 22-year-old male, and he's not interested in eating the same food as the marketing executive, female at 35. And so it's very interesting how to get them both to eat better and subsidize their food. But we took this stuff seriously. Milton Friedman infamously said the only reason a corporation exists is to maximize the return of the shareholder. And that's kind of the thought that conscious capitalism is not built upon. The only reason a corporation exists is not to solely increase the wealth of the shareholder. And in fact, the best way to do that is by harmonizing the needs of all of these other stakeholders too. And so there are 4 tenets to conscious capitalism. One's higher purpose. Another one's conscious leadership. Higher purpose. You have to think in terms of you're building your business for some reason other to make money. You don't want your surgeon to be a surgeon. Why are you a surgeon? How did you get started? Well, I just like to make money. I make a lot of money doing this, And then conscious leadership. CEOs are overrated in general, but not when it comes to culture. You cannot have a conscious business, a stakeholder capitalist business, unless the leadership, particularly the top guy, is conscious and devoted to it. The third one is stakeholder model and a conscious culture, and we could spend another hour talking about those things. But I like to think in terms of the wake, W-A-K-E, George Bailey. If you say you're employee first, you have to really be employee first. And by golly, we were. I mean, we put the employee over the customer. And then we would say, gosh, Milton Friedman at the Container Store, if we really think if you take better care of your employee than anybody else, I mean, if you really take better care of her than anybody else, she really will take better care of your customer than anybody else. And if that happens, everybody's going to be happy. you know? And so we ran on that for a long time, had the best benefits. I was always real devoted to getting equity stock in the hands of employees. Very hard to do. When you're closely held and you and your rich friends, your rich friends come around after your business gets successful, and then you can get them to come in and all that type of thing. And even though they're wonderful, wonderful people, they all have a lawyer, an accountant, or a spouse that won't let them dilute themselves in favor of giving stock to employees. So Sharon and I actually diluted ourselves unilaterally a couple of times, and because it's just too hard. And that's one of the things that drove me to going public, doing the IPO. Of course, the private equity guys were delighted, but they didn't think we'd ever do it. I'm like, yeah, I think it's the only way to get enough stock in the hands of employees, because it's just standard operating procedure to do options and things once you're public. And I'm not saying that was my best decision, because I think if we're going to do it over again, I'd probably figure out another way to get more stock in the hands of employees. But if you take your best employee and your most devoted employee and you give them a little piece of the action, they become better. They sprout wings. They become much better. And then you got to call them partner. Thank you, partner. I mean, they love the business as much as you do. And it really is a big, big deal. And I like real stock. There's phantom stock and there's other things. And the legal community will tell you, don't ever give them real stock, because then they can sue you more easily than if you gave them phantom stock. Yeah, but they know the difference between, real stock and phantom stock. And so it's worth the risk, I think, particularly in a good culture, to make employees, true partners. It's not like we're socialists. We're capitalists. We like making money. I want to make more. I've got more money than I'll ever need, but I want to make more. But how you do it is just so important. I don't want to make it. And then the joy of having your employees be well off is just overwhelming. And equity is the real way to do that. It's hard to get comfortable, really comfortable, just on salary and bonus. So if you're going to be an employee first company, you got to really focus on that all the time. But the good thing is that if you pay attention to how you're treating your employees and you treat your vendors the same way, then that stakeholder becomes equally as wonderful. We used to have vendors that would say, I'm tired of dealing with all the mass merchants. I'm only going to have one customer, you. And I said, well, you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. They're like, yeah, I'm going to watch this basket. I'm just going to work with you. And some of the best partnerships we had, worked out that way. And there's no contracts, it's just a loyalty. And think of the vulnerability. You only have one customer now, So that's important. Mackie and I never give a speech where we don't talk about love in business. And love has a great place in business. Nobody ever talks about that. You were talking about building a business for goodness, for good. That's what conscious capitalism is all about. Building a business for good. Now that I'm retired, I do a lot of nonprofits. I'm on too many boards and all that. But I really felt like I was doing more good for the world by building the Container Store as a model of conscious capitalism than I could by spending more time with whatever my favorite nonprofit was. So you got me carrying on, Ryan, about one of my favorite topics here. And I'm just...
Let me respond, or at least let's dig in a little bit on some of this stuff, because there's a lot there to unpack, and all of it's important. Obviously, we don't have ever enough time that we would like, but there's a few things I would like to ask you. One is, we don't need to spend a ton of time on it, but a couple of times you've referenced this difference between the word harmony and balance. And it's not the first time someone I really look up to has talked about it. I guess I've never had the courage to...
Like I say, we got to get you out more, man.
You got to explain it to me, but in so many words, how would you describe the difference, at least as it relates to maybe the stakeholder mentality versus the shareholder mentality? You said those words very strongly on that topic. Why?
It has to be done without trade-offs. This is something that Ed Freeman, all your listeners should Google Ed Freeman. He's the father of stakeholder capitalism. He doesn't admit to that. He doesn't like to be called that, but he's the absolute key guy that started this whole thing. And he says, there's no trade-offs between these. It's a harmony, And maybe one voice in the harmony is a little stronger than the other. So it's not a balance. The guy that gets paid last is famously the shareholder. So everybody, makes that distinction. And a lot of people will say, well, and that's why you got to do more for the shareholders. Like, no. Ironically, if you do more for the other stakeholders first, then the shareholder will become more enriched than if you myopically focus only on the shareholder. The magic is lost, the harmony is lost, and the employees are unhappy, the customers are unhappy, and you can bet the shareholders are unhappy. So community, environment matter more and more and more, but everybody's happier in a safe, good, clean, happy environment. We've been pioneers in, well, most notably San Francisco location. You want a nice environment. It impacts your traffic on a big scale or a small scale. And what I really wanted to say about that, I guess, is that there are no trade-offs. You can't have a shareholder thinking that, well, these guys are into conscious capitalism, so I'm going to put up with them paying the employees more than I think they should. That doesn't work. By doing that, you gain productivity. At the Container Store, we were selling solutions, not items. So if your toy storage area has been bothering you for years and you come in and this employee that's been there for 11 years helps you solve your toy storage, you're doing a little dance on the way out the door. You solved a problem. It takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of knowledge. It takes a lot of for her to help you solve that problem that's been bugging you for years. And so it's really hard to replace that. Stanley Marcus taught me not to use the word train. He said, Kip, we don't train employees. We train seals and bears. You educate employees. But if you say educate, everybody thinks you're paying for their MBA and stuff. So we had like 183 hours of formal training for each first-year employee, and the industry average was 9. I became chairman of the National Retail Federation. We represented 1 in every 4 American workers. I got to know a lot of people on Capitol Hill because we were advocates for those 1 in 4 American workers and retailers. But developing people, training them, I mean, you got to have an environment where they stick around to do that. That reminds me that because of being chairman of the National Retail Federation, I got to pitch conscious capitalism to Donald Trump, and I've had a lot of interactions with Joe Biden. He's a big advocate of it, but one thing I've always loved about stakeholder capitalism and conscious capitalism is both the left and the right equally love it. You have some extremes on both sides that reject it, of course, but anything except for the most vast extreme, loves it. Donald Trump told me in the White House, that he loved it. And Joe Biden came out and visited us in Colorado, and we spent a whole weekend trying to figure out how to do more of that between vice president and president. I love that. We talk about pitching a big tent. I love John Mackey, but he's a very right-wing libertarian, and I'm a moderate Democrat, so we don't agree on politics. But, man, we passionately have agreed on this stuff for, 50 years. And so that's another aspect of it. I'm jumping around here, but
no, that's good, and it's so interesting. I mean, you used the word wake, and I was with John at the CEO summit last fall, and that was the first time I had met him in person, and just randomly we got to have lunch together, and he was bemoaning how conscious capitalism as a notion was getting kind of identified with the other word woke, which he was like, man, that is really unfortunate. And we've got to figure out the right messaging so that we don't get caught into that morass. What are some ways that you've been, I guess, voicing the benefits of conscious capitalism so that it doesn't get confused with maybe some of the trends around, I'm putting air quotes up, the woke thing?
Yeah, well, the woke thing's discouraging. It's very unfortunate. And it's misplaced as it pertains to stakeholder capitalism or conscious capitalism. To fight the accusations like fighting a ghost, I mean, we talk about pitching a big tent, very big tent. If you don't let some sinners in, you're going to have a very small tent, and so we take on everybody. And we've got some very liberal people that are huge advocates of conscious capitalism. We've got some very right-wing people that are very big advocates of it, and that's what you have to do. That's what I mean by, actually, I think Joe Biden's kind of moderate, but some people think he's really far to one side, and certainly Trump's pretty far to the right, and they both kind of equally claim that they love it. That's important, and I think people are saying this person or this thing is woke. I don't know how you fight that. It's a little discouraging because I thought we were really reaching a tipping point. I've given so many speeches on conscious capitalism, and I don't think I've ever had almost any resistance to it. But this woke label applied to it sometimes causes a little bit of that. But I think it's really unfair, wrong. Actually, I think the people behind this the most are probably right of center. The people hardest convinced are the really far left people that just aren't going to agree that capitalism is a good thing under any circumstances whatsoever. As long as some people have more money than other people, they're out. But I've spent 20 years, converting a lot of those people too. So the woke thing, hopefully, is a passing phase. It really frustrates me. It really saddens me because this is something that people that are talking like that probably, once they understand it, are very, very enthusiastic about it because capitalism has actually saved the world. 100 years ago, 120 years ago, something like 93% of the world lived on the equivalent of $1 a day. And that number now is like 14%. And it was capitalism that did that. It wasn't socialism. Socialism didn't work very well. It wasn't communism. 200 million people died, 200 million. It was capitalism. And, it's hard to believe, but this is the most peaceful time in mankind's history. Literacy is at an all-time high. People are so tribal, but most scholars think that we're less tribal and less racist than we used to be. The whole sexism thing is seemingly taking forever to get to justice, but supposedly most scholars agree that we're less that way now than we're, 200 years ago, it was really a mess. And so it's kind of been capitalism that has lifted humanity forward. And the people that are running around calling everything woke need to celebrate capitalism being celebrated. Anything can be improved, You're one of the best skiers in the world, but I bet you think you could be an improvement. Tiger Woods, when he was leading the tournament, he'd go over to the driving range and hit golf balls till dark while everybody else was drinking and stuff, And so anything can be improved, and capitalism can be too, after all the nice things I just said about it. But that's why I'm excited about it. I think it does a lot of good for the world. Business as good. This is the best way to do business. This is the best methodology for capitalism. And it's the most fun way. If all you want to do is just have a job or create a little business that you enjoy more than going fishing or playing golf, this is the way to do it. The opposite way is no fun. I guarantee you that. And so to the end, that it might also be the most successful way of doing it, makes it worth pursuing.
I would be remiss if I didn't also ask you to just talk briefly. I mean, you mentioned Herb Kelleher. We've talked about John Mackey. We've talked about you. And we talked about Haley Rushing, who does a lot of work for Rally Day.
So awesome. Yes.
And she, in various ways, has stated that her time advising and collaborating with Herb Kelleher at Southwest Airlines was her awakening to the difference between purpose, marketing, advertising, and really left that experience with Herb understanding why purpose was such a powerful force in business and a desire to help other organizations find that purpose and more expressly use it to amplify their business efforts. And I know that purpose is a big part of conscious capitalism. Can you just shed a little bit of light on that for our listeners and why purpose matters?
Well, I guess it's the a priori assumption, the whole deal, higher purpose than just making money. When John Mackey started Whole Foods, he was completely fanatical about all that. The predecessor was called Safer Way, grocery store called Safer Way. And like I said, we were roommates, and then he moved out and he moved down into this co-op. The reason he moved in there is because there was a lot of very beautiful women that lived in this co-op. And then these very beautiful women taught him about organic and natural foods and everything. Before that, he was eating Mexican food with the rest of us at El Rancho and all that. He was passionate about it. We spent 2 years trying to find products that were clean, well-designed, functional products that did something for you. They saved you space, but they organized you. There's a certain Zen quality to being organized. I couldn't study for an exam until I got my apartment in Austin all perfect. And then at 2 o'clock in the morning, I could begin cramming because the environment had to be right. And we got so excited about these products. Almost all of them had never been retailed before. There was such a thing as material parts handling, saving time and space in business, but nobody ever really thought about that for homeowners or your pantry or your closet. I think Gray Line existed and Rubbermaid existed. They had a few products, but we had to bring commercial products into the home to organize one's life. And what we were really after, and probably the greatest thought we had, was that if you're organized, it saves you time. If you're traveling and you're reasonably organized with your packing and everything, it saves you time and life. And we were very passionate about that. A life is better if you're reasonably well organized. And we felt like that we were doing things, really good things for people by helping them get that way. If that toy storage area is driving you crazy enough, you become obsessed with it, and you're actually worthless in everything else in life until you get that straightened out. And so I think that business and art and beauty follow purpose. One of my favorite thoughts is the master sushi chef he's the best in the world, or one of the best, 3 Michelin stars. But he 3 Michelin stars, but he's like, please don't call me a master. I'm still trying to perfect my rice, humility in pursuit of beyond excellence, but, just world class. That is so beautiful. And his purpose is not just the fact that his omakase costs $240. That's not really what he's after. He's after a much higher purpose than that. And that's why you're willing to pay $240 for his omakase. And so purpose is everything in business and in life. And you can't be Herb Kelleher or, John Mackey or Jim Sinegal without being passionate about your purpose. And you can't be a great leader without that either. And then all those people are pretty darn optimistic and positive too. I don't think you can be a good leader unless you're reasonably optimistic. You have a purpose. You're not fake. You're thorough. You're genuine. Even though people seem very confused today and they can't tell the difference between true and false on the internet, boy, they can sure tell the difference between true and false on a business leader. And so purpose is kind of a priority, prerequisite. Got to be there before anything else is going to really be anything truly worth spending your career working on.
I love that. And one of the ways that Haley has described it to me, and you can use this with people, not just organizations, but when you've got the purpose right, your value proposition, your reason for being, your strength, your confidence radiates. It comes from within the company outwards in a way that is way more powerful than, an advertising campaign, which she does not believe in. And if you look at Southwest Airlines and you look at the use of employees today, still to this day, in their advertising, and you get on their planes, you can feel that purpose still, even after her passing. And in some ways, that's the wake that you were talking about. I think of your organization, your business. I'm an OCD weirdo and always have been since I can remember at a very young age. And when I walked into your store for the first time when I was going to college and I was trying to organize my room, it felt to me like I had just gotten home for the first time. It had a certain serenity to it. It was inspiring how clean, even all those SKUs that your friend at Costco told you not to carry, how you could have that much assortment and still feel that serenity. The employees that came to me and I wasn't going to spend a lot of money. It was very obvious. I was a college student, but they took my challenge to heart, and I could feel it. It radiated out of your employees, and I could feel it. It was in Boulder, Colorado. And to this day, it's one of my favorite stores to go to and see the innovations. And I'm just inspired by the environment, the word you used. When I think of Whole Foods, John did a beautiful job of making it not just about one's food, but one's food in service to a better world. And, sometimes that can be a little obnoxious, and no offense to John, but, and by that, I mean all the Teslas and the nice cars in the parking lot at Whole Foods, and I can't ever find a parking spot. But, there is something to the way you feel when you're in a Whole Foods that is distinctly different than going to Albertsons or Safeway or Kroger, where you don't just feel better about yourself, but you feel like you're contributing to a better world. And I can only imagine how the employees feel about that. So, I would like to just say, as we sort of segue out of the interview part of this, thank you, Kip, for being such a great role model to maybe us overly capitalists and reformed capitalists, and to inviting us to participate in a wholly more fulfilling pursuit of conscious capitalism. I shared with you before our podcast that when Nadia and I left our dinner with you and Sharon, we made a decision to bring conscious capitalism and a chapter to Colorado. One of my partners and colleagues here, her name is Samantha Holt. She asked if she could lead that effort, and she's already assembled a board and she's off to the races. And so I think it's just kind of a cool story of meeting you all at dinner and your own sense of purpose and the wake now in Colorado that results from your being such a great role model for us. I just want to say thank you, and that my gift to you will be to make sure that wake is a little bigger and beautiful, if I could use that word.
What an honor, and what a great example of wake. But what an honor for Sharon and me to know that we had a role in what you're doing with that. And God, it's a great thing when you have a business leader that starts a business or turns a business in this direction. You touch the lives of so many employees, so many vendors, so many stakeholders, and you really do make the world a better place. We used to have these big gatherings, actually at the Ritz-Carlton. We'd fly everybody in from all over the country on their 10th and 15th and 20th, 5th, 10th, every 5 years. And some of these people had never flown an airplane before. They certainly had never stayed at the Ritz-Carlton. And we would have world-class food and wine. Everybody get a little tipsy, and they would stand up and tell what their 15 years meant, talking about culture, talking about all of the things that we've been talking about in this. And my favorite thing was when the significant other or mom of the 20-year employee would stand up and say, her working for the Container Store has made her a better mother and a better wife. And I used to get embarrassed, say, "Oh no, please, that's too much. I can't handle that." But it does, because of the values-driven, way methodology of doing business and that type of thing. And really, the greatest honor was when the relatives would stand up and bring the whole room to tears, talking about that kind of thing. So how the employee feels. And so I feel like that with your podcast and with your starting the Denver chapter, you're going to impact countless lives, for the better. And gosh, that's enough to make you want to get out of bed in the morning and go to work, isn't it?
Well, I can't wait to have our second dinner and give you a progress report. We obviously have a long ways to go. I'll probably see you at the Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit, perhaps I think it's in October. So maybe we'll get a chance to grab a meal and talk about our progress. And I can't wait to continue that first dinner, the sequel. And again, thank you, Kip, for your time. Please give our best to Sharon. A little known fact about Sharon and Kip is that they were made CEO and President Emeritus at Container Store when they retired, both of them. And it's a side story of a great marriage and a great partnership. And it's super inspiring to see you all together. So please give your best, or my best rather, to Sharon for us, Kip. And I wish you a great rest of your summer. Hopefully it cools down in Texas here at least in the next month or two.